this election really comes down to one word. It's change. Change, change, change. Change so you can afford food. Change so you can afford homes. Change so that you are safe in your street. This election is about change.
You know, why vote for New Democrats in this election? I'll tell you why. Because when we have power, we use it for you. We use it for people. We make people's lives better. Millions of people in our country are better off because you voted for us.
I've managed budgets before. I've managed economies before. I've managed crises before. This is the time for experience, not experiments.
With just 5 days until Election Day, party leaders, as you can see there, are spread out across the country trying to sway voters in regions where the race is tightening. According to the latest public opinion polling, the Liberals are still ahead nationally, but other parties are gaining ground in key battlegrounds, particularly in BC and Quebec. So what could that mean for the results on Election Day? And could we see any major swings in the polling in the final days of the campaign? With me now to talk more about that is Nick Nanos, Chief Data Scientist and founder at Nanos Research. Hi, Nick. Good to have you as always. When we spoke last week about some of the ups and downs that you were seeing, you had anticipated post-debate, post-long weekend, post-advance polling, that you'd have an indication of whether trend lines were solidifying. Can you go over the top line numbers that you're seeing right now?
Well, the latest CTV News Globe Mail Nanos tracking has the Liberals at 44%, the Conservatives at 39%. So, you know, the thing is that the Liberal advantage has continued throughout this whole campaign. It's not as big as it once was, which was 10 and 11 percentage points, but it's anywhere from 4, 5, 6 percentage points nationally. And, you know, the NDP, although they did see a little bit of a lift coming out of the French and the English debates, are now back down to 8% nationally, which speaks to the collapse of the New Democrats and how the Liberals had benefited by what I'll say, Jagmeet Singh and the trouble that he's having trying to get traction.
And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means on a more provincial, province by province basis in a second, because it might be a bit of a different story. But I wanted to just go through from the start of the campaign until now, because we've got sort of your trend line throughout the last almost 5 weeks at this point. Would you assess it or characterize it as a campaign with a lot of movement or just a little?
I think it was significant movement, especially when there were big events, like, say, for example, on Liberation Day, and Donald Trump significantly had an impact on the shape of the advantage that the Liberals had. And then what we did see is, as the focus of the campaign shifted away from Trump onto the cost of living, housing, all those other issues, that the Liberal advantage kind of narrowed. The big question now is what will happen in the close. And I think the other thing is in terms of factors that will shape especially the fortunes of Pierre Poilievre, apart from Donald Trump, I don't think you can talk about Pierre Poilievre's future without talking about Premier Doug Ford. You know, we had Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who just won a big majority mandate, part of the same Conservative family, openly questioning the strategy of Pierre Poilievre, saying words like the truth hurts and stuff like that. And, you know, it's not helpful for any party or contender to be prime minister to have people who you would think would be on the same side questioning the strategy and questioning the leadership. So why don't we just say this, Vashi? Pierre Poilievre's future, his political future, is influenced by Donald Trump, but also Doug Ford.
Let me sort of dig down into not just the Ford question, but different regions. Let's start with Ontario. How constant has the Liberal lead been there, and how much movement have you seen in that province?
Well, the Liberal lead in the province of Ontario, which is one of the key battlegrounds, has been, you know, they've been anywhere from, 45 to 50% in the province. So they've had basically anywhere from a 15-point lead to right now they have an 8-point advantage. Right now the Liberals are at 48%, the Conservatives are at 40%, and the NDP back are at 7%. So, the lead hasn't been as big as it has been, especially during kind of the focus on Donald Trump and Liberation Day, but it's been fairly consistent.
What about British Columbia? Because I know you were talking about the national NDP numbers, but they've seen a significant increase there, which is providing for a more competitive race, I think, than in maybe any other province at this point. Like, it's harder to predict. What is your view of what's going on there?
Well, as of last night, British Columbia is an absolute toss-up between the Liberals and the Conservatives. That we have the Liberals at 41, Conservatives at 38, NDP back at 16. But as context, Vashi, so it's a statistical toss-up, factoring the margin of error for the survey. But even for the NDP, they've marginally improved their support in the province of British Columbia. But the thing is in the last federal election, Vashi, the support for the New Democrats was in the mid-20s. So the thing is right now we have an environment in British Columbia where it's a bit of a political feeding frenzy for the Liberals and the Conservatives on the New Democrats. And with the vote splits, it's very hard to predict who might have the upper hand when it comes to seats coming out of British Columbia.
And what about, just lastly, before I let you go, Quebec? Because jumping off sort of what's going on with the NDP, both the NDP and the Bloc have, I guess, seen their messaging evolve. They're talking now about holding the government to account, whether it be a minority or to a certain degree, a majority. And they've become very explicit. Today, Jagmeet Singh was explicit about it. On Sunday, Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc, was explicit about it. Has the Bloc seen any movement, and at whose expense in Quebec?
Yeah, no, the thing is that for the Bloc Québécois, we have them at around 24% in the province of Quebec, much lower than where they traditionally at. The Liberals are at 42. Even the Conservatives are basically statistically tied with the Bloc. The NDP are way back at 3% in the province of Quebec. And this has been, for the Bloc, this could end up being one of their worst election campaigns in recent history. And it looks like what we're seeing in the province of Quebec is not necessarily just an embrace of the Liberals. It's actually more like a repudiation of Pierre Poilievre, that his style of politics and kind of his approach hasn't really gained a lot of traction. That said, at 25% in the province of Quebec, that's better than average. Perhaps the Conservatives might be able to win a couple more seats, but not any kind of significant breakthrough that could be a game changer for the Conservatives in the province of Quebec.
Okay, Nick, I'm going to leave it there. I know we'll be speaking frequently ahead of the election. Thanks for making the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, bye-bye.